Some people have trouble with the light. Does that
No.
bother your eyes or
No.
your concentration or anything?
No.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. That was well, that let's see here. Well, it was 1916. Or is that land prior?
As I may have said before, the college property was purchased from my grandfather in 1916, at which time 2 houses, which were at the base of the path going to the main campus, were moved across the railroad track. One of the houses is now at 10 Rose Street. The other house adjoins the property and the land faced Elm Street and was joined the Briggs Lumber, now the Archer Lumber Yard. The barn on the Archer Lumber Yard was the main barn for my grandfather. The water to that property came from a spring up near the high school, and in the spring of the year is still running in the yard at the Archer Lumber Company. When the school was built in 1931, I remember my father, Floyd Holmes, and I going to the basketball game, which has always been a very popular sport in Cobleskill, walking into the gymnasium and remarking, well, this would make a good swimming pool, let's build a gymnasium. I think his remark for that being was that a spring, which was at the corner of the present gymnasium, was blasted shut. And he always said that there was more water in it than there was in the Cobleskill Reservoir. And it probably was. But anyway, it is an interesting fact that that water supply was never developed. I guess probably next rendition, you have to go back to family, is around 1925, when my uncle designed and made a snowmobile. He had been using our horses in his practice, but he had a snowmobile which he made his calls, and I remember him coming to the farm at one time, and later the drift that he went over below the stone house was 18 feet on a telephone where they marked the mark where he went. 18 feet, the drift was that deep. Very interesting how he got over. He had sleigh runners on it at that time, and then toward spring he would take the sleigh runners off and put on wheels on the front as the snow disappeared. Of course, we raised the horses and sold the horses that my grandfather had imported, and we had raised horses up until after my father died in 1951, when horses went out of the picture. My Saturdays was usually spent in the blacksmith shop in Lawyersville, as we had to reset the shoes on the working teams about once a month, and they were taken down there. The price at that time was $1 a foot, and I talked to a blacksmith today, just recently. The price of shoeing a horse today is $60 to $125 for one horse. That's how prices have changed. Then I guess I go on through high school. The road from Cobleskill to Sharon was constructed in 1928, 27 and 28. The stone was purchased from my father, where we built the present barn that's on the farm today. And we still own part of it because their $2,500 was never paid for the stone. Just a little side statement. I tell my friends that I still own part of the Road 145. Harold, I don't know if you have something you want me to say indifferently.
I guess another area that we would like to talk about is this home here? Your Holmes home?
Well, this home here, according to my aunt Adelaide Baird, who was married to my mother's brother, Dr. Baird. My mother's name, I should say, was Leona Baird. And this home was constructed by her relatives. Actually, it was constructed by a Mr. Lawyer. I think his name was his name was Lambert Lawyer, and he, in partnership with the Corder family, not only constructed this house, but after this house was constructed, the present Bull's Head was constructed, I think in the period of 1802. My aunt always told me that this house was constructed in 1797. I did find that her grandfather carried a mortgage on this house to Charles Corder and later transferred to Charles Holmes, who became the county judge, and was in the Holmes and Baird family from then on. I think the property was transferred, I know it was, in 1923 to my uncle, Dr. John Baird, from the Holmes family, and my two cousins were raised here. They both haven't been born in Gloversville. The house is unique in that the design is exactly like the Bull's Head. Contains a lot of mahogany furniture. The stairway, the mahogany was imported from Florida. And originally the kitchen was in the basement. As I remember when I was about 5 years old, not being able to realize where the food came from. But it was brought up on a dumb waiter. And in 1923, after my uncle purchased the place, they did put on and closed the back porch, changed the entranceway, and he used the office as his waiting room and took the back bedrooms and made that into his treatment room and had a half bath, which have now, of course, I've made over into a complete bath. A dining room was made into the enclosed porch, which is most beautiful. The flower garden and grape arbor out in the rear are depicted on a map of Cobleskill of 1856. And I have a picture of Cobleskill in the hallway presently, which shows the whole village of Cobleskill. And this house, of course, was there then, along with some other interesting homes on the street. I have enjoyed living here and did not dig up the garden when I moved here because of the old plants that are still coming up. This spring I did spay up a section and have 2 pails of bulbs. I don't know what they are. I'm going to plant them this fall and come what may next spring and see what comes. There's a Christmas rose out there that I've never seen before, and a lot of people don't even know what it is. It starts to blossom in the end of October and will poke through the ground and blossom through the entire winter. The most beautiful flower you would want to see. It'll start out as a pink and then turn to a white. So I pick them all winter long, give them all the blossoms away, I think, because it's so unique and interesting. You can't find the roots very often in greenhouses. You have to order them special. The furniture in the house is some of my wife and I, and it's been handed down from 7 generations, some of it in the Holmes family, on my side of the family, and of course other pieces from the Baird family, which we dearly enjoyed. I'm refinishing most of it so that it looks sharper than it did The woods of the wood furniture, you will find sometimes as many as 5 different woods in one piece of furniture, with glass pulls, which are interesting, or brass pulls, I mean. And then there's some pulls that are made of wood. You would think that they were porcelain, but they're not. Particularly a tier pull on a pine chest that I'm looking at right now, which my uncle used to use for instruments. The house has been great to display the glass that my wife and I started to purchase way back when we were first married. We are particularly fond, or were, and I am still, of the blue Valencia waffle. We have one cabinet completely filled with that, and it is certainly pretty. I still buy it if I see it. I don't know what I'll give. Probably give it to my daughter-in-law. I guess that brings it up as to way to think. Oh, I might add the grape arbor out back. I don't know how many antique people try to buy it of me. I tell them it's not for sale, and I have an exact duplicate front upstairs in the garage, and that's not for sale either. It's interesting though, the horticulturist from the college here in Cobleskill said that the root of the grapevine is probably well over 100 years old, which is most interesting. It is the blue grape, and then there's another vine coming now of the white grape, very sweet. The cherry tree that's here now, there's a new one that came from a pit from the present cherry tree, and I have no idea how old that is. It was there way back when I was a little kid, so it's got to be pushing 100 years old. When I first came here on picnics, when the cooking was done in the basement, the food was passed out through a window, which of course now has been changed. The pear trees are still here, that were here when I was a little kid. And I don't make applesauce, I make pear sauce every fall. I take pears and apples mixed together so I don't have to use sugar. Give it all away. Grapes I usually make in grape jelly and give most of that away, unless people want some of the grapes. I have two couples that like the pears and also like the grapes, and they come and help me pick them. There is in the basement a complete laundry area, and it's a full basement. No water comes in, which is wonderful. Everybody thinks I should have a sump pump, but you don't need it. The well out back, of course, I use that to water all the plants, because the chlorine in present water of Cobleskill will kill plants too fast for me. So I pump the water and feed it from the well. I guess the great feature of this house is that it's so tight. You don't hear the noise on Main Street. Particularly if it is heavy, just pull the vine drapes and you can sit very comfortably. The back porch is covered and overlooks the garden. One place that my wife was especially fond, she was an invalid, was especially fond to sit and look out and see the birds and see the flowers. And on the porch, by having a peace vine, or lace vine rather, excuse me, it is a fast growing vine, and it makes the soundproof on the back porch. I don't know what else you want me to cover,
I guess,
Harold.
would you like to tell us how you happened to become a veterinarian and your practice a little bit?
Well, I started at Cornell in the ag school thinking I would not do what my brother had done and take 4 years, but come back home because I liked animals. And the late Dr. Wadsworth, Dr. John Wadsworth's father, W.J. Wadsworth, came up to the veterinary conference, asked me what I was up to, and I told him, well, I thought I'd finish my required courses, and maybe I wouldn't stay the 4 years. And he asked me to put in an application for the veterinary college, saying it was time a Schoharie County boy went into veterinary college. So I did, and on my last examination in June of 1935, I got my notice that I was accepted in the veterinary college. So that is the reason I became a veterinarian, and was going to, after graduation, I was going to take a job with another veterinarian as an associate, but he called me and told me to come home. So I came home, and he was retiring from his federal and state work in regulatory medicine, and I helped him finish up his tenure, and by so doing became very acquainted, and so I was the only one in my class who went out on my own without associating with everyone, with someone else. So I started in the basement of my father's house, and then I came to Cobleskill and lived with an Aunt Mildred Baird in the building where Dr. David Baird was practicing, and practiced out of the basement of that house. And then we purchased, I was married to my classmate, Lillian Pangman, of high school. We started going together the fall that I came from college. And after 2 years, we were married, bought a home on Elm Street, but the village would not let me put up a hospital. So my father gave me 2 acres on the farm in Lawyersville where I constructed our home, and later bought a piece of property from my brother Franklin and built the present Cobleskill Veterinary Clinic, taking my nephew, Dr. McDonald, in as partner, and later turned it to him as I went to work full-time for the state, from which I retired, credited with 34 years of service for the state of New York. My aunt and her daughter Sarah Baird were living in this present home, and in 1984, Sarah passed away, and I was her alternate executor of her will. Her sister was very ill at the time, so she signed off. I became the executor of the will, and her sister wanted me to have this home since I was related to both sides of her family, I guess. So Lillian and I moved from Hammerstone Village to this home, and Lillian had 5 years of beautiful life here, which we enjoyed very much. You'll have to excuse me, gentlemen, I gotta stop a minute. To backtrack a bit about the horse situation of the area, my grandfather and my uncle Claude Baird were charter members of the league, which their primary concern was to find horses that have been stolen in Schoharie County. My grandfather had the only horse, a picture of which is in the library, that was ever stolen and not recovered. It was thought that it probably was stolen by a circus group, or perhaps gypsies, many of groups of which used to pass even when I was growing up, a young boy up as far as a teenager, before the time of a lot of automobiles. This horse was a unique horse. He was used by my grandfather in his country practice, called Big Jim. My mother and my Aunt Mildred used to bring the horse down to my grandfather's office, which was above Rich's store, and leave it for my grandfather, and they would go to school. And the horse was really something, in that he would go to the water fountain on the east end of Center Park whenever he was thirsty and get a drink. He was never tied, and would go to the fountain, drink, turn around, and go back. And if my grandfather had left him facing east, he would pull up to the curb on the east side. If he was facing west, he would turn around in the main street and head west, exactly the way my grandfather had left him. Many a story told about this horse, but he was always there when my grandfather needed him. If my grandfather thought the weather was too bad, he would fasten the lines back on the wagon and tell him to go home and send him home, and he would drive into the barn floor on Rose Street where the barn was located, and the men would hear him and they would put him away. He was quite, apparently a great horse, and I guess many tears were shed when he never was returned. Then I remember my grandfather later getting an automobile, and his method of practicing early in the morning, he would do his calls, if he had them, north of our home in Lawyersville, and he'd come back to the farm, and if my father wasn't finished milking, he always wanted to milk a cow. He said that that was the best exercise to keep his hands free and easy moving in his practice of human medicine. He did quite a bit of surgery. I remember them telling the story of an amputation of a man's limb on his dining room table up on Rose Street, and then accompanying the man on the train to Albany Medical Center, which is now the Albany Medical Center. I remember them telling that story. The man had fallen into a thrashing machine in some way. So I guess he did quite a bit of surgery, and according to some of the old instruments that I have and passed down to my uncle, I think he must have done quite a bit. Granddad always took a Florida vacation and always sent all of his grandchildren postcards. So he always had the family at heart, although my grandmother never